welcome back to the Airways Podcast, Season 9, Episode 3. And we have a really good one today. Just for background, over the past 3 months, the aviation and aerospace industries have been caught in a state of limbo, I guess you could say, waiting to see how President Donald Trump's proposed 20% tariffs on all EU exports would go into effect. So interesting, this week, we finally got clarity. The aviation industry will continue under a tariff-free trade deal. So to help us unpack what this means for the strength and the future of the sector, we're joined by Hooman Yazhari, partner in Michelman and Robinson's Restructuring and Corporate Practice Group. Hooman brings a rare dual perspective as both former CEO and a seasoned lawyer in the aviation space. With 25 years of experience leading private equity-backed and public companies, particularly in transport, logistics, and aviation, he's guided airlines through complex corporate and financial transformations across international jurisdictions. So please welcome Mr. Yazhari to the Airways Podcast.
Thank you, Helwing. Thank you, Rohan.
I'm so glad you're here with us. And where are you joining from today? It looks like you're in...
I'm a wonderful customer of the aviation industry, but today I'm sitting in Los Angeles.
So if you had to choose between Heathrow and LAX in terms of spotting, and you would draw a line between them and say, okay, I can go to the In-N-Out Burger for one. Actually, no, I would start on the other side. I would begin at Heathrow, do a little spotting in the morning for the early versions, hop on a flight, go transatlantic, land at LAX, and then see some evening arrivals and at the In-N-Out Burger. That's a good day.
That's a fantastic day. So now that we're sort of talking about what would our ideal day be, one of my dear friends who's an aviation lawyer invited me to play tennis at Queen's Club. And, you know, that's hallowed ground, right? And if you're a tennis fan, it's almost up there with Wimbledon. And I had no idea that Queen's Club is also on the flight path for London Heathrow. So as we were hitting, every minute I would look up and be like, oh, there's Emirates A380. That aircraft is coming from there. And so I think I'd play tennis in the morning at Queen's, catch the flight over to LAX and end the day with, you know, a double-double at In-N-Out and watch those planes land.
Yeah, there is something to be said about iconic cities, airports, and the environments around them. Me living in Chicago, for example, the lake where I play a lot of my sports and where I tend to be most of the summer is the best vantage spot for all of the traffic coming into Chicago or transiting over Chicago airspace. And it's such a love letter, right? It's such a love letter that we see in the skies with airlines, with aviation in general. We are in an era right now where we're more than a century into airlines that have existed, that have come and gone, that have been plagued by all kinds of traumatic and heroic stories. And also from a financial solvency lens, there's that aspect of it, which is unfortunately sometimes the wind that gets taken out of the sails, or you have your other events that take place that are truly catastrophical that can't be surmised. Pandemics, recessions. And so at the end of the day, we all return to this love of seeing that thing up in the sky, that little speck just going across the horizon, right? Where we look and we ask ourselves, I wonder who is on that plane. I wonder who is flying that plane. And I wonder where they're going and who they're connecting. And why am I not on that plane? Why can't I get away?
It's funny. I feel the love you have for aircraft and the industry. You know, someone who's worked in different aspects of it, when I see the airplane go overhead, I think about everything you said. I also, as a former lessor, think, well, I wonder who's leasing that airplane to this airline. And as a former Gate Gourmet executive, I wonder what they're serving and how much they're spending on their food, right? So yeah, it's a fascinating industry with so many components. and so many things have to go right for it to work properly. And
Right.
it's just mind-blowing how sophisticated of an industry it actually is. And it's tough to make money, right? The margins are thin, and so many things can affect the margins, whether it's the input costs and inflation and tariffs, as you mentioned earlier, whether it's the demand side, whether it's competition. And then there's all these exogenous shocks that come to the industry through either geopolitical or natural disasters. And it's tough. It's not for the faint of heart, but it's filled with people that have kind of kerosene running through their veins. So everyone's enthusiastic about it.
That is it. I mean, literally, you have kerosene in your veins. It really doesn't matter what flag you represent, what gender you represent. It is everything. In the skies, there's no hierarchy. And so I'm really grateful that you joined us today because we're at an interesting crossroads in the US airline industry for many reasons. And I started this podcast in 2016, prior to the first Trump presidency. And during that period, we had a very different environment in 2016 compared to where we are heading into 2026. In that era, you had a newly emerged American Airlines with US Airways, led by Scott Kirby and Doug Parker, which has now changed over to a different leadership. You have that leadership team at United Airlines that is doing wonderful things for that airline and also trying to compete well with Delta, which is also a very well run, well managed airline. And then you have American Airlines that's kind of in the next tier down, along with Southwest Airlines, which is trying to reinvent itself, never filed for bankruptcy. And now you have the discount carriers. 10 years ago, double-digit margins were Spirit, Frontier, Allegiant, and others when they went down that path. And we're now in a situation where their fortunes, at least Spirit's fortunes of bankruptcy, are back in the red for them.
Mhm.
I'd have predicted this 5 years ago, nor 10 years ago.
Yeah, Spirit at a time when it first rolled out its business model under Ben Baldanza, who I had the pleasure of actually working with, was the most profitable airline, right? And it was growing, and it was and then the fortunes have changed, and they filed again for bankruptcy 3 days ago, right? I'm not surprised that they filed again. The first bankruptcy was extremely limited in scope. And when you've got an airline that you need to fix, you usually got to fix the entire aspect of its business model, right? So obviously it had too much debt. And yes, you can use a bankruptcy to fix debt. But it's more than when you've got too many aircraft. You've got aircraft that have engines with them on them with problems from the OEM, the Pratt & Whitney engines that all need to go back to the shop. And that's a 3-year process. So in the meantime, a whole bunch of them are sitting on the ground. You've got a cost structure, which unfortunately includes having perhaps too many staff. You've got inflation, which has also hit the other parts of the supply chain and the cost infrastructure. You've got a route network that no longer is getting filled. You've got a product that the market doesn't really show that it wants anymore. And then you've got competition from the legacy airlines who are perfectly happy to show the ultra low cost that they can also sell an ultra low cost product and ticket. And then you can actually use the entire network of a larger airline rather than the limited ones of Spirit, Frontier, etc. So it's really interesting how the tables have turned. And there's lots of reasons, apart from that, right? There's the fact that the regulators allowed the 3 legacy carriers to become the giants that they are. So they have scale. And then when Spirit tried to merge earlier with JetBlue, the regulator said, no, you can't do that anymore. So they allowed the competitors to get big and monstrous. And then when the little guys tried to merge to be able to keep up with them, the regulators kind of said no. And then the ultra low cost business model is also very much focused on the consumer and the leisure traveler. And then when you've got an economic outlook, which because of the tariffs, because of the volatility, because of years of inflation, because of the, I think, revenge travel having, been revenged and already done, and people sort of falling back to earth in reality and looking at their budgets, there's less of an appetite to spend money on travel than perhaps there was 2 years ago, right? And then who's going to stop traveling? It's people with the tighter budgets who would obviously look at Spirit and various other low cost carriers before they would look at the premium seats, for example, on American, Delta, or United. So many things I think have conspired to make life very difficult for that end of the market. And it looks like the big guys are, one, doing really well because of their credit cards and mileage programs, right? There's a big subsidy. And then they've got the business travelers and the leisure travelers that are willing to pay premium prices for those who still don't seem to have cut back on their flights. Whereas, you contrast that to the kind of tumbleweed of what goes on in terms of ticketing and credit cards and all that on the other side of the fence, it
Yeah.
doesn't look so good.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I think that the perfect textbook case examples of economics have been laid out for consumers, especially just in the US, the last 10 years, with regards to bundling, unbundling, merchandising, use of credit card rewards, and also how we look at the history of airlines that have grown, merged, and purged through bankruptcy. The things that I see sometimes are these very twisted, I feel like I've seen this before kind of thing. Remember when US Airways filed twice for Chapter 11 in the years following 9/11?
Yeah.
And with United.
Yeah.
Well, now Spirit's kind of doing that again. And it's like, whoa, we've seen an airline file for bankruptcy once, emerge really early. Was it too early? And now they're emerging again. And we're also having to see what they're doing in terms of leveraging collateral, geopolitical tensions, supply chain. Was it the engine situation that caused Spirit to really get hampered? Was it the JetBlue influence? Was it the basic economy? There's so many things at play here, and there's all kinds of consultant and political rhetoric for what has happened. People want a retrospective or a post-mortem later on. It's more about now, what are the tangible assets that exist here? And with what you have in front of you, and we're talking about whether it's debt, equity, assets, employees, brand, etc. How do we play with the ball, right? In terms of getting a vision to like lead an airline moving forward like Spirit, or is it way more nuanced than that?
Well, you touched on so many interesting aspects of it. Let's start with the brand. What does the Spirit brand stand for? Right? It's funny. It's the only airline, I think, that if you turn on Saturday Night Live is like a meme for that cast, right? Of bad service and bad experience. And now having filed twice in the space of 9 months or whatever it is, again, the brand needs to be thought through. Will the brand survive this second process? Who knows, right? There's a few outcomes that could happen here. You could see finally Spirit run towards Frontier and merge, right? Like they've been kind of on and off trying to do for the last couple of years, and which would actually make a lot of economic sense. Their fleets are aligned. It's A20s. Their customer base is somewhat similar, and their routes, with some pruning, would be very complementary, right? And their business models obviously are similar too. And so if that happens, what happens to the brand? Who knows? It may disappear. And if it's a standalone, maybe it's time for a rebrand, right? You talked about other assets. There's aircraft in there. There's 220-ish, new-ish aircraft. So good aircraft, right? A320s on the whole. They've got 40 to 50, which are affected by the Pratt & Whitney gearing issues. And the fix for those means a shop visit. And as we all know, the MROs are all full, and Pratt & Whitney and various OEMs are all full. So it'll take a good 3 years to churn through that. What happens with those airplanes? If I was running Spirit, I'd give them back to the leasing companies and say, look, I'm
Yeah.
not anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take them back. You also have a bunch of other aircraft, which I suspect people would want, right? Until a few months ago, when domestic aircraft demand was high and international, you'd think it would be really easy for the leasing companies to take those things back and put them on with other people. I still think it's going to be easy for them to do. But you said a cold wind has kind of blown through this industry in the last few months, and perhaps it's not going to be as easy. And the other thing one has to remember is, if Spirit turns into a liquidation and all the airplanes are either sold or given back to the leasing companies and just dispersed throughout the global aviation industry, how long does it take for those aircraft to be maintained, go through their D checks or whatever it is, go through the MRO process, get rebooted and reconfigured and out? It won't be that easier, because again, MROs are full and supply chains are strained, and et cetera, et cetera. So you'd think that there should be, and if you're on the leadership or of this company that's going through bankruptcy, I think everyone will ask, well, what's the best way to make this estate worth as much as humanly possible? Is it what Frontier is going to pay for whatever they want, half the aircraft? I can't imagine they'll take all of it. And then do you give the rest back to the leasing companies? Do you sell anything if they own it? Or is it better to just liquidate it because, for example, the M&A deal isn't going to be seen as viable by the court and the experts in the bankruptcy process? So you've got assets, which I think the rest of the industry wants, but how do you get them actually up and running into today's constrained world? And then you've got to think, if you're Spirit, okay, is there a way for us to make it alone, right? If we shrink to profitability and have the right routes with the right aircraft that have engines that work, with the right cost structure, the right number of pilots and crew members, can we make a go of it again and go back to what should have been this airline's business model? Or are we dead certain that we have to merge? And a Frontier seems one, but there's Sun Country, there's Breeze, there's a whole bunch of other people. There's still JetBlue out there, although they've thrown their lot in with United, it seems, and a whole bunch of others. So I think the next few months are going to be really interesting to see where Spirit ends up and the Spirit assets end up. And then there's all the people who are suppliers to Spirit and have gates at airports which Spirit uses, that are all going to get punched in the face
Yep.
in the next few weeks as Spirit decides to reject contracts.
There's a whole ecosystem.
Yes.
And I think we have been through this before, as I said.
Yeah.
It's that standard, what I recall back in 2004. My sister was a student at the University of Pennsylvania. I was growing up in Dallas, and my parents would book her travel on US Airways for her to come home from college. And I remember my mom saying, hey, they recommend we should book with American and not US Airways, even if American's more expensive, because US Airways may not make it to Christmas. And this is like fall 2004, right?
Gosh.
Well, we all knew what happened afterwards. Ironically enough, one of US Airways, for the history buffs, moves at that time was they chopped down Pittsburgh and they built up a Fort Lauderdale little hublet, and US Airways lived to see another day in 2005. The point is that the ecosystem of suppliers, vendors, and also cabin crew and the aircraft in and of itself piece. When we also look at Airbus and what problems it's had relative to Boeing and the problems it's had. When we've devolved into this like binary world, right? If one isn't having problems, the other is, and then back to the other. I was reading some reports that Boeing's July order book was really slow. However, deliveries started to become commensurate with backlog, and deliveries started to happen. There's certainly fanfare with American Airlines getting their 787s and Qs, as we like to tease, even though they have some teething issues. Lufthansa with their 787s that may or may not have Allegris certified, vaccinated for their antihistamine product. The point is, and I say this with jest, as I also say it with love, there are many ripple effects and shockwaves created out of one brand of an airline all the way to aircraft, to airports, and so on and so forth. And we are also in 2025, where we are in year one of a presidency where tariffs, trade, interest rates, and economic outlook, along with geopolitical tensions, there's a lot of wild cards here.
Yes. And I want to perhaps, do a go around to circle back to the idea of these three main variables, right? Current and maybe ask, since you have experience as CEO, how can industry leaders capitalize this, tariff-free ecosystem, or with tariffs? How do you see the supply chain being affected? And perhaps maybe you could talk about how maybe Airbus has an advantage with its geographic diversification, right? It has factories in Mobile, Alabama, for example. So that's a plus for them. Whereas Boeing is totally dependent on exports. So how does all that play out in your view?
It's so interesting, and it's so complicated and difficult to give you an answer that I think is complete. But here we go, right? So you first started with the tariffs. And suddenly it looked like it was disastrous, and the airlines were saying, we're not going to buy any more airplanes from across the ocean because 30% more to 50% more isn't going to work. And then they did the deal about a month ago with the EU, where US and EU came back to zero tariffs for aviation and aircraft, right? And then you think
Right.
happy days, and all is well. US still has tariffs for steel and aluminum, right? At 50-ish%. So obviously there's a bunch of that used in aircraft. So that's going to make input prices go up, regardless of, the whole aviation exemption. And then you've also got a list of items that may have tariffs on them because of national security here in the US, right? And it's not quite clear what that is. There's about 400 or so things that are on there. And that just means there's uncertainty. If you look at what's going on today, and I think you just mentioned that, Rohan, the OEMs are ramping up. They've had ample time to pull themselves out of the chaos and turmoil of geopolitics, COVID, supply chain issues, and then tariffs. So they're able to get better, right? And the regulators have given Boeing the ability to ramp up as well. I think the OEMs are good because they also have backlogs that go way past the end of this decade. So even if people aren't putting orders in today, I think they're going to be fine because they've got a whole bunch of homework to do. And
Yeah.
airlines really need new aircraft to either expand or retire aircraft that have been artificially kept going, which otherwise would have been either parted out or retired. And at first I kind of thought to myself, these tariffs are really bad for Boeing for every reason that we just said. And then if you look from a different angle, you see that when the US administration goes to negotiate with China, Qatar, Japan, Indonesia, concession that all these folk are willing to make is a giant Boeing order.
Yeah.
I kind of thought, oh, actually, Boeing is getting somebody else sort of hold a gun up to other people's face and say, do you want to buy some of my friend's airplanes or not?
Pretty
And
much.
they're like,
I
oh,
think the
yeah,
first
we
one,
love these airplanes. Thank you. We'll buy more.
Pretty
Please take
much.
the tariffs.
I
Right?
think the first was Vietnam, right? The first case.
Yeah. Qatar
That sounds
ordered a
right,
bunch.
yeah.
The Chinese are in talks for ordering more, and then they said they wouldn't. Now they will. The Japan and Indonesia put their hands up to say that
And
they will.
yeah,
Korea
and then
ordered a whole bunch.
India's gonna throw their hat in the mix. Brazil and Latin American countries have been noticeably quiet.
Yeah,
But
I mean, poor Embraer, they still have a 10% tariff, and
Yeah.
Brazil is still subject to tariffs. And I think they're trying to figure out what to do. But is this good for the industry? Is it great that Boeing is being given all these orders? Sure, on one level, but then if the tariffs cause the kind of upheaval that suppresses demand, right? If people don't know how much their groceries are going to cost, whether they have a job, we talked about all those people that were being affected by either job losses or Chapter 11s. The guy who's working in ground handling in one of the airports that's about to get wiped, they're not going to go buy airline tickets, right? And businesses that are looking at their global footprint, are they going to invest in other countries? Maybe not. And that means less business travel, right? And all that resiliency that we've seen for people flying first class or business class, perhaps maybe shorter lived than we hope. So I think the nitty gritty of the tariffs, there's always something to work around, right? And you can even arm wrestle countries into buying your airplanes. And the EU doesn't seem to be able to arm wrestle people into buying Airbus airplanes, which is kind of interesting as well. But if we've got a global economy that isn't firing on all cylinders, then everybody loses, right? And I think that's the bit that I keep thinking about when it comes to tariffs.
yeah, it's one of the things that I'm so proud of with our podcast is that we have had such a very varied array of guests, including you and others such as Brett Snyder of the Cranky Flyer, Will Horton previously wrote for Center for Asia Pacific Aviation, Jay Shaba, who's a well-known writer in the industry, and at various periods of time in various moments where we've addressed kind of these macroeconomic factors at a place in time. In the case for Will, for instance, it was March 2020, and Will was living in Hong Kong at the time in one of our episodes and had basically been through the panic buying, right,
Yeah.
that had taken place
Yeah.
after COVID. And so you have to think about these consumers, right? And the consumer mentality across the spectrum, not just leisure, but also your person, as you mentioned, that could be on the front line in whether they're going to be booking an airline ticket and how that cascades across the demand patterns. And what would you say are the things that you may feel like airline leaders are missing across the board? Perhaps are there things that they're focusing on too much with fanciness, like AI as a talking point, when there are some very more immediate concerns or needs that would be beneficial for airline CEOs to focus on from a financial perspective, from a really whatever?
Look, to have a well-run airline, there's lots and lots of boxes one has to tick, right? So you've got to have the lowest cost base you possibly can. And so I think the airline leaders are really focused on efficiency because they don't really have a choice. Interest rates dictate your cost of capital, leasing rates dictate how much it costs you to have an aircraft, labor rates are a big part of your cost, overall cost as an airline. And all of that is kind of set by the market. You can't really negotiate in this market against a leasing company or a bank for your interest rate or unions on what they're going to get paid for pilots and cabin crew, etc. So then it comes to, well, the efficiency of operations, making sure that you run an airline really very efficiently, being lean and being very good at execution. Some of the trouble with that is, and you mentioned the fancy stuff in AI, well, their IT systems that keep breaking down, as we see every 6 months, one airline goes dark, are large, CapEx intensive, and all out of date. So what are the airlines going to do with that, right? And all I've heard about AI so far is that some airlines are using it to figure out how to charge you more than perhaps they would have without having had this tool, which obviously is going to rub people the wrong way, right? But I assume most people who have AI are going to figure out how to use it to make money. So I'm not surprised. I think the other thing that airlines have really focused on recently is the product in the premium cabin. Wherever you look, you just see upgrades and investments in the seats and the food and the service levels of that premium cabin. And what's really interesting about that is that it's a bet that airlines have to take probably 6 years before they do it, right? So if you're redesigning like a whole new cabin, like Le Premiere on Air France KLM, right? Which has this beautiful 5-window first class type cabin. That takes a good 5 to 6 years to put in place. You got to design the seats, you got to get FAA approval, you got to manufacture them, then you got to take the aircraft out of service and fit them out. So are these decisions that were made 5, 6 years ago on product? And what decisions should airlines be making today? And as someone who's, in both cabins, sometimes at the front, sometimes in the middle, sometimes in the back, I would hope that the airlines are thinking about how to fix the product in the middle and the back, because it's not fun, right? Your whole experience from getting to the airport to checking in, to going through security, to waiting at the gate, to the wrestling match that is getting into the into the jet bridge, and then getting to your seat and hoping to God there's room in the hold above your seat, is just so stressful, right? And then the food is terrible, and the service, doesn't make you feel like you're loved and wanted. So I would kind of say to the airline folk, can you think about just making people feel like they're treated like human beings? And, I may be banned now from flying most of these airlines, but that's what I'd say.
That's interesting. We went from procurement diplomacy to, guys, just make us feel loved.
Just make us
Yeah,
feel
we're-
loved.
Yeah.
Just make us feel loved. I feel safe in airlines, right? I think that's their number one task, and I commend
I was gonna
Yeah.
say,
our industry
Absolutely.
for putting like big heavy metal tubes with people on them up in the air and landing them safely day in, day out. So thank God for that, and long may that continue. But
absolutely.
let's just make us feel a little better. Make it cleaner inside. So if you put your hand in the seat pocket in front of you, you trust that it's not going to be full of lurgies, things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take a break and to hear from our sponsor, and we'll be right back. Support for this podcast is brought to you by the Saily Travel eSIM. You booked your next trip, now get Saily, the global eSIM data service. Choose your destination and plan and activate before you go. No plastic SIM cards, no phone number changes, no dodgy Wi-Fi spots, no roaming fees, just affordable mobile data wherever you are. Try Saline Connect instantly. Get 5% off your first purchase with the code AirwaysMag5.
Agreed. And I think that's one of the other missions that I want to cultivate in this podcast, is not just to have aviation insights from experts and opinions from the best of the best. I also want there to be some altruism here and some giving back, because in the skies, we're all united, right? And in this world, transport is critical, and moving people from place to place it makes you believe in higher beings and safety and trusting pilots and flight attendants, cabin crew, ground control, all kinds of people throughout the process who help make this journey safe for us. And also for the individuals that are involved in those altruistic endeavors. So yes, please share more about your
Thank you, Rohan. So I chair a fund called Beyond Capital, which now is on its 4th fund, although funds 2 and 3 and 4 are Beyond Capital Ventures. And my wife runs those with her team of about 15 people scattered around the world, especially in the areas they focus on investing. But Beyond Capital is focused on investing in venture capital stage businesses, so earlier stage, in purpose-driven leaders that bring the basics of life to those that the markets or various other forces like the government haven't been able to. So healthcare, financial inclusion, supply chain resilience, transportation. And so I was the co-founder of Beyond Capital with my wife about 14 years ago. And I've always thought, what can airlines do, or what can the aviation industry do to make the world better, right? And I think as a bunch of airline folk, we are all vehemently aligned that it's a net positive for humanity, right? I think we have to acknowledge the environmental issues that the aviation industry has to cope with. And I think there's a lot of good work being done, and there's some economic realities that we have to face. But if you take the net benefit of uniting a world, especially today, when the world is so divided ideologically and politically, but you've got this industry that allows anyone from any country to be face to face with somebody else in a matter of hours on the other side of the planet, someone who shares the same hopes, same dreams, same anxieties, the same loves, and different food, and perhaps different senses of humor and different ways of dressing. The industry shows us that there's this incredible shared humanity that we have, right? And then there's all the fact that all our economies are run by travel logistics. And then there's all
Yes.
the other things, like letting people have access to goods and services that they otherwise wouldn't have had without aviation, right? Think of the COVID vaccine distribution supply chain. How insane was that? Think of transplants when people need a kidney or a heart. There's a phone call and people get the organ, the surgeons, the team, the patient in one place. And very often the aircraft is required to do that, right? So we've got this industry that I think creates so much value on a spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and financial level for our planet. And I think we should do everything we possibly can to protect it and to help it thrive, right? I think that the next wave, which seems to have ebbed away for now, for the aviation industry to face is going to be its carbon and its environmental impact. There's a lot of people investing a lot of money on sustainable aviation fuel. Maybe that's going to work. I think there's a lot of technologies that I've seen that you can retrofit onto aircraft and aviation assets that make them even more fuel efficient than people might be aware that they could be today, which really extends the life and the useful life of our asset base today. Because I don't think you can take trillions of dollars of airplanes and just throw them away because you've got either electric aircraft or hydrogen powered aircraft or whatever it is that might come next. I think you've got to figure out how to use today's aircraft more efficiently with fuels that perhaps have less of an environmental footprint. And there's a lot of really good work being done on that. I think I'm really optimistic that the aviation industry, because of the pitchforks of social media, probably in 2020, 2021, 22, talking about how polluting it is, has had to actually be inward looking and looking at, well, how do we become even better? We've got safety right. We've got the business model kind of right. We've got all these people who are part of this giant global supply chain to make these sophisticated machines that do wonderful things. And now how can we be good global citizens? And I think the industry is going to set the way, as it has for many, many other things like safety, like globalization, and like manufacturing, as it will for environmental sustainability.
Absolutely. And as you were mentioning that, I had a little bit of a nostalgia for some of those pictures I see of someone sending in a 747 that's going to Victorville, and they're like, she's off to be converted into soda cans for Coca-Cola. And I'm like, a little bit of me dies inside. No, there absolutely is no way. I mean, Lufthansa's, made their keychains from that famously. Over to you, Helwing.
No, yeah, I'm reveling in the fact that I'm like a metal guy. I love aircraft. aircraft types model, just seeing them. And it is a love of an industry, and the fact that just think about the current state of affairs in the world where everyone's glued to a screen. You don't have a lot of that face-to-face contact. So that point, I really like what you said about that, because, it is a marvel, that flight, commercial flight and modern flight. And just to plug, I live in New York. So the other day we went to Rockaway Beach. And if anyone wants to see amazing aircraft coming out of JFK, I'm talking about, just seeing them turn towards Europe. I'm talking about British Airways, ITA Airways aircraft, 787. I mean, it's just amazing to see that. So yeah, the love for aviation is unique, and the importance of aviation cannot be understated. That's for sure.
It's a matter of
Yeah.
respect. It's a matter of
Yeah.
dignity. And I think that 2025 has taught us so many invaluable lessons in the first 3 quarters alone, starting with some of these accidents that have taken place in Washington and tragically in Ahmedabad. We've talked about it on this podcast as well. And for those reasons, because this industry is what it is, it has to be durable and scalable in order to be viable, yet it's also exceptionally fragile.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's kind of a metaphor for life.
Mhm.
Everything we have is something we shouldn't really be taking for granted, because there's a tremendous amount of fragility to kind of everything around us, right? And at the same time, there's resilience and there is a spirit to want to keep going on. And I think the aviation industry has that. And look, I think if you think about what makes a good leader, a good leader is someone who doesn't give up, right? And by
Right.
leader, you could mean a CEO, or you could mean someone who displays leadership qualities as part of a team and may not be running it, but someone who doesn't give up, someone who has a vision, someone who's inspired by that vision,
Inspiration, that's key.
someone who's enthusiastic. And I think Warren Buffett always says, I want to hire people who are intellectually gifted, enthusiastic, and full of integrity. And if they have the first two but not the third, it's going to be a disaster, right?
Mhm.
So you've got these people with the will to go on, doing it from a place of full integrity, being able to build teams that feel safe and feel included and feel inspired, feel like they're giving something to a cause or a vision that is much bigger than anything that they've ever done before. And they feel that contribution is what this industry, I think, is all about, right? And I think when we see what it does and how many people it takes to do it, and how complicated it was and how difficult it was, and how every time there's weather or there's geopolitics or there's war, this whole industry has to pivot. It kind of shows the true metal of everyone who works in it. So look, I feel like I'm talking to the choir about how much we all love aviation.
I actually really
I get
like
excited.
I also kind of like the juxtaposition of fragility with viability in terms of, as you mentioned, leadership style. I think the three of us could teach several courses on airline insolvencies from all 6 continents.
Yes.
Examples of poor leadership, poor choices, catastrophic events, what have you. And no 2 bankruptcies are the same, of course. It's also just a phenomenon that you may see how in the United States, bankruptcy is viewed as a tool that isn't the same way that it's viewed as in Japan.
Yes.
For sure.
Like in the case of the United States, sure, staying out of Chapter 11 was the goal for most of the airlines post 9/11 until they realized that was actually the only way they were going to be able to move forward. And the one now that's actually dealing with the brunt of not having filed for bankruptcy is Southwest right now, which is
Yeah.
so ironic on all kinds of levels. Another topic for another day. Contrast that with Japan. When Japan Airlines filed for bankruptcy in 2008, 2009, it was very, very public. And this speaks more to, I think, Japan. And I've worked with Japanese companies now in my full-time job and understand that Japanese ways of doing business and conducting business is its own learning journey. However, the way that the JAL bankruptcy was orchestrated, also a beautiful case study in terms of how there's layers of emotion that go along with the restructuring process and the painful pieces that include more than just asset retirements, route suspensions, curtailment of partnerships, procurements. There was a nasty little spat for a while whether JAL was going to leave One World and ditch American Airlines to go over to Delta. There's a very interesting piece of data we can get during the fragility states of an airline in whatever state of insolvency. We've read books written by Gordon Bethune from Worst to First, or from Jason Cottrell and Jay Shabbat on Delta, from Gary Kennedy on American Airlines 12 Years of Turbulence, Oscar Munoz on turnaround time. Spirit Airlines, the rest is still unwritten for it. And it would be tragic because it has been an airline that has had a brand recognition, even from a business model that is no longer affiliated with its brand absolutely at all whatsoever, emanating from decades ago.
Everyone took it because it was a good idea, right? A lot of people copied it. Look, I'm optimistic that Spirit will actually pull through in a new shape. I suspect it'll be part of a larger group and be merged. But that core covering, the southeast quadrant of the United States where it's strong will continue to be strong, right? And look, the economy is always cyclical, and I think the aviation industry is cyclical, and right now it's one of the most difficult times for that sector. But it doesn't mean it doesn't have a reason to exist. It's the management and investors' role to figure out in what shape that existence needs to manifest itself. And the other thing, Rohan, you said that was really interesting to me. I, as a CEO or as a lawyer, have been involved in four Chapter 11s, all of them successful. In the end, the asset and the enterprise exited with a healthy balance sheet and is still going strong, right? What's interesting about the Japan Airlines point that you said versus the American is there's a massive cultural difference in the US versus Europe versus Asia on an insolvency or a bankruptcy. I grew up in Europe and Asia and have lived now in the US for about 14 years. The US has this wonderful, wonderful mindset that to succeed, it's okay to fail a few times. And I think, and if you read the stories of any successful entrepreneurs, it wasn't that they woke up one day and built something
Yeah.
at the end, right? They did a lot of pivots and they probably had a lot of failure, right? And in America, that's part of your grooming and training process and your badges of honor. And I find that Chapter 11 is kind of viewed in that same line. It's a tool, it's a process that one must go through to come out the other side like the phoenix from the flames. But you're still a phoenix, right? You're not a failure. Whereas in Europe and in Asia, I think there is some shame or embarrassment to the process, right? And their laws are different. Although, for example, the Anglo-Saxon jurisdictions have started to create a scheme of arrangement in the English and Irish courts, for example, which somewhat mimics a Chapter 11, but is way more streamlined and therefore a lot cheaper to kind of allow that phoenix from the flames. Whereas, in many mainland European jurisdictions, insolvency is a process that seems to be legislated to take an asset towards a wind down and just a sell down, right? And so there's no mindset of, hold on, let's press the pause button and figure out how we fix this. It's, is someone willing to buy this thing and it's a total mess? No, I'm going to liquidate it for you, right? And I think culturally and legally, I would certainly think that it's better for everyone to accept failure as part of a process of ultimately leading to success. And therefore, allow for airlines to go through that process, not just in the US. And we see foreign airlines come to the US to take advantage of it, right? Scandinavian,
Yes.
nothing to do with us. But they filed here and turned around and now they're out. LATAM did the same, right? So you're seeing the jurisdiction
Aeromexico.
here be used. That's right. So I don't know. I think America has many, many wonderful things that can export. Planes may be one of them, but maybe the whole restructuring mindset and system should be another thing. And the airline industry uses it really well.
Yeah. I mean,
And
Ben
obviously us
Baldanza,
lawyers.
Baldanza, if he was alive today, and may he always rest in power, would he recommend Spirit, use this next opportunity, the second restructuring, in whichever way possible? There's no crystal ball in this industry. You can't really rely on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I don't
Michelman and Robinson's basically you take care because I did want to know more about the firm. So it's all about restructuring and corporate practice, right? So
It's
dealing
Michelman
with
Robinson is a wonderful firm that I've been part of for the last year and a bit. It's a Los Angeles headquartered firm with offices in New York and London, as well as smaller offices across the United States, including Texas and Northern California. It's a firm that I think first and foremost is a litigation and disputes firm. Like if you've got a problem, not to copy the A-Team tagline, but that you really need to get solved properly in litigation, I think our firm is one of those you would go to. It's also a diverse firm in its practices with corporate, with restructuring, with a real focus on labor and employment expertise, especially in the hospitality industry, in corporate, in finance. So it's and what I love about the firm is it's full of just the nicest people you'd ever see. The culture of the firm is one where people are happy to be there. And it's very entrepreneurial. It's very industry focused. So the people who understand aviation, for example, like me, come from the industry and understand what it's like to be a client. And it's very much encouraged for all our practitioners to have that background. And even though it's a 25-year-old firm, it kind of in many ways feels like a disrupting startup because of the openness to try things and be entrepreneurial and a real desire to want to be at the forefront of an industry and not just be good lawyers. So that's Michelman Robinson in a nutshell. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, no, very nice, very nice. Okay, I do want to. Because we were kind of getting into the predictions, and
Oh,
how about we continue with our tradition and with Mr. Yazhari and maybe have a couple of predictions or even hot takes for this year and next.
well, as long as you delete them in 6 months if they're really wrong.
No guarantees.
Let me re-record them.
We've been on the nose. We've been
Yeah, we did one for 2024, and some were apt and some were way off.
some are way off. But
Yeah.
that's the nature of
No.
right.
I'll give it a go. What
Okay.
would you like to ask?
But with this speak about Rohan, maybe Spirit, maybe any mergers, maybe no.
I guess my first question would be, do we think this EVTOL thing is going to actually have legs? I mean, it may not even be.
Propellers.
That's one thing I'm thinking of. Actually, I'm going to put you on the spot for this one. Do you think that Air India and Tata Group is going to be able to get its act together under Campbell Wilson? Right now, I've been a little skeptical.
So I have a special place in my heart for India. Capital Fund focuses on India and East Africa. So half of the portfolio of that fund is in India. And I've been lucky enough to go there a lot. What I think the challenge is for Air India is a cultural shift and a mindset shift that will really encompass a gigantic workforce. There's the acceptance of all the new aircraft that they've ordered. And then there is the resilience that needs to come into their operational integrity that I think will take years. So whilst I don't think that it's a no, I'm not skeptical. I think the Tata Group has got this incredible culture and track record and the leadership as well, the new leadership. but I do think it's going to take time. And I do think it might surprise on how long it actually takes, because there's a lot to do and there's a lot of people to pull along on that process. And then there's a lot of vendors and other stakeholders that you don't control that have to perform at that level for Air India to be firing on all those cylinders.
Yeah. What about JetBlue and United? Blue Sky.
I think they're going to be best friends. Are you asking, are they going to get merged into one big entity? No, I think I think JetBlue is in that weird middle ground between not really being big enough to be a proper big legacy airline and not really being in the weakness that Spirit has. So I think it's going to sort of find a best friend and hold their hand.
Riyadh Air International.
I have an interloper. This is my daughter.
Well, hello.
Hello.
Hi, daughter. Welcome to the Airways Podcast. I didn't know we would have another special guest, and I really like your necklaces.
Thank you.
Aurelia is 6 years old, and I think she has a gold card on at least one airline, if not two. So she's a flyer.
Great. I'm going to guess Singapore Airlines.
I wish.
Virgin
It's
Atlantic?
American. We used to live in Dallas.
Okay, that's where I
for a
grew up.
long time. Yeah. So
Okay.
I built a lot of status on that airline. Thank you, America. But
Aurelia's your
So-
youngest concierge key member you will find across.
well, they look at her and her brother and they're like, "Oh, those are future keys."
It's
So I'm
lovely to
sorry
have
for
you.
the interruption. This is
No worries,
Steve
no worries. Well,
for my
Aurelia, I
daughter.
was just asking your dad a couple rapid fire questions about predictions for future aviation. Do you want to join us? You're like, okay, sure. So I had asked about Riyadh International Airlines. All right, it's a big talking concept.
So what's interesting about Riyadh, like we've seen so many airlines in that part of the world start up from scratch and do really well. And they've had investment and they've had resource and they've had a tailwind, right? And it could have been a macroeconomic one. So you saw Qatar do amazing things, Emirates, amazing things, Etihad, amazing things. And I think Riyadh Air will kind of do the same thing. You've got new airplanes, right? You don't have the union issues. You don't have the legacy issues. You don't have the MRO issues because everything's new. You've got a well-capitalized balance sheet through the PIF. And you've got a real ambition and desire to get them to take some of that wonderful, business away from the three other airlines in that neck of the woods away. So I think they're gonna come at this hard, and I think
Beautifully stated.
they're gonna do well.
Beautifully stated.
Mhm.
So Aurelia, get ready for this question. With regards to the Trump administration and the next few years ahead and the industry as we go into 2026, whether US airlines, global airlines, what should we expect to see? What do you think might be on the horizon?
I don't know what that means.
So let me
Well,
try that one, Ariel. I think the one thing this current administration has been consistent in is their surprises and really not allowing for business as usual. So I think what we're going to have is more surprises, more regulatory changes. Perhaps some of those will be, applauded, right? Perhaps the antitrust authorities will allow for further airline consolidation, which I think may be really required in a tough industry. But as long as no one knows what the tariffs are going to mean, what trade deals are going to mean, and where the economy is going, there might be a slight reluctance on people to invest. And that makes every industry, including the airline industry, somewhat have to sit and wait. So perhaps in the next 6 months, the tariff negotiations will be done. America will suddenly get back all its manufacturing that this administration wants it to get back, although it will take a while for it to build up again. But ultimately, the country will be seen as being stronger. Regardless of that, it will be steady as she goes. And people know what it's going to cost them to buy a component and how long it's going to take to get it. And that means people are going to invest. And that means private equity funds are going to come back in. That means orders are going to be put in. If people's economic well-being is stronger, they're going to spend more money, and then everybody wins. So hopefully we'll have some of that stability that business needs sooner rather than later.
Amen.
I agree. I like it. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Yazir. It's been a pleasure
Thank you
to share.
for having me on your show. It feels like just talking to a couple of buddies who share a similar passion and love for this industry.
That's the vibe we go for.
Yeah, and it's
Yes.
awesome. I love it. I love it.
That's all right.
I remember, I was 7 years old and we were in Iran, wrong religion, had to get out when the revolution happened, just take what we could carry. And the aviation industry was obviously there, and we got on a flight right before the airports closed and went to London. And ever since then, the industry for me has had this meaning much greater than everything we've talked about, but something that allows for freedom, which this country stands for, something that allows
Yes.
for people to follow their dreams, and something that allows for the world to just be a better place. And I think we touched on that many times in this hour. But I think, again, what you guys are doing is absolutely terrific. Find a bunch of people who love this industry and get them to talk.
Exactly. There's always relevant topics, and there's always relevant people with beautiful insights like yourselves. And I cannot thank you enough for joining us. It's been such a blessing, and kudos to you for also enjoying your California lunch hour with us. It looks like it's so beautiful out there.
It's amazing. It's amazing. We have the most beautiful city with perfect weather, beaches, hiking, amazing architecture, and light. So it's a wonderful place to be.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah,
Please, everyone, just a reminder to follow us on your favorite podcast catcher. We're also going to on YouTube. So please follow us there. And yeah, thank you. It's been a wonderful episode. So thank you very much, Rohan and Hooman.
Thank you, Helwing. Thank you, Rohan. A real pleasure.
All right. So everyone, thank you for listening and see you on the next episode of the Airways Podcast.